wore the same thing so you'd recognize me from the picture because the face changes, daily. First of all, I really do think this Creative Mornings can... Do I have the microphone right? Okay. I think this Creative Mornings is great. My daughter Ariane brought me here with Alona, her dear friend Alona, one morning, and I just fell in love with the whole concept. And I'm really honored to be up here. I live in Jerusalem, and I made Aliyah, and my husband's family made Aliyah over 40 years ago, and my daughter lives here, married, wonderful Israeli, and we have 2 Sabras, which I never thought would happen in my lifetime, so miracles happen. I'd like to thank Marcel and the whole team. They really do volunteer and work so hard, and they all have careers and children and families, and kol hakavod. This is probably as close to... When Ariane told me that there's now 180 branches, I realized this is probably as close as I'll ever get to doing a TED Talk. So, okay, I'm really happy it's Friday, and what I would like to tell you is that I prefer not to write a speech. I believe in talking from the heart. Well, the problem with that is for 10 days, I've been talking to all of you, and if I showed up with the speeches I wrote, I'd have 10 pages of every day a different thing. So yesterday, I had the fortune of Daphna. Where are you, Daphna? Daphna called me, and Marcel insisted that, I have a speech coach, and I'm thinking, are you kidding? I've been talking publicly for 40 years, but thank God I'm open and I listen because Daphna was great. So all week long, I was telling my daughter yesterday, it felt like I was creating a painting doing this talk. Because when you paint, if you like what you do right away, forget it. Don't trust it. You have to really go through the whole process. And it was like a process all week long. I would take notes. This feels like, and then I thought, what does the word context even mean? And context, to me, is the essence of things. And I'm really very interested in the essence of things. So I did prepare. I would like to open with a quote. I've had very wonderful teachers in my life, and one of the most brilliant that I actually have used is Abraham Joshua Heschel's writings, and I taught it the Corcoran College of Art and Design in Washington, D.C. for like 10 years, and it didn't matter if you were Jewish or not Jewish. I recommended you had to read a book by him because he understood what it meant to be truly an artist. He said an artist should not have a memory, and that means, what does that mean? That when you approach your work, whether it's writing, whether it's making a new soup, whether it's whatever you're doing that is creative. And to me, being creative is a daily activity not reserved for the studio, for mixing paints and getting dirty and being alone and having to feel. It presents itself even if I put lemons. Art to me is taking something ordinary and making it into something visually extraordinary. Not that there's anything ordinary about a lemon. It's amazing. But to take a bag of lemons and put it in a cobalt blue bowl that is made in Israel is pretty amazing. Just picture it. So Heschel, when he says an artist shouldn't have a memory, what he's really saying is don't think what you did yesterday. Don't think how you felt yesterday. Every single day is a new day. And everything you learn along the way you can bring to that day. So this is a quote. I knew I was talking to a lot of young people, and I wanted to, and people, seniors that I love now that I'm a senior myself, but hold on. This is a message I really very much believe in. Heschel was, he was on Carl Stern, interviewed on NBC towards the end of his life. And Carl Stern on television asked him, "What message have you for young people?" And Heschel replied, let them remember that there is meaning beyond absurdity. Let them be sure that every deed counts, that every word has power, and above all, let them remember to build a life as if it were a work of art. So what does that mean, really, a work of art? You know, I have so many people approach me as if there's something romantic about being an artist. The truth is, it's a very lonely profession, and life is lonely, and we fill it with people we love, we fill it with beautiful places, and reading and learning and thinking, and what we do with it is what makes us our own artists in living. I would like to discuss 3 areas which Daphne has helped me line up. One is how I survived becoming an artist and what I learned very early on. The other is what does it mean to be in the moment and truly see? And how to be in the moment and let go of ego. Okay. I made myself a few bullet points so that I really would give you the context, the essence of over 40 years of being a painter. I grew up in a Holocaust Orthodox survivors Hungarian background. There was no such thing as artists. You know, I never knew an artist. But when I was 14 in high school, I had a teacher who said to me, "You should do this." So is it okay if I stand here? Yeah? Can you all hear me and stuff? I just need to lean a little. When I was in university, I cried a lot. My husband is witness to it. I would just leave and cry all the way home, on the freeways, on the beltways, walking and wherever I was, because it's very hard to learn anything, and it's very hard. Oh, thank you. That's nice. It's like being, I don't know if it's a compliment or not, it's like being offered the seat on the bus. A friend is very insulted. Somebody offers her the seat on the bus, but you can all hear me, right? Okay. Oh, I'm so glad I wore gray. Maybe we should have the yellow chair. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
To say no to stuff.
No. No, I don't want to. I was kidding. Well, I could fit on 2 chairs, actually. Okay. It's more comfortable. I'll tell you in a minute if it's more comfortable. It's more comfortable. And look, see, this is a painting. See, the gray, the red, the yellow, and all you need is one little color to make something sing, and you've got it. So whether you're decorating your bathroom or preparing your Shabbat table. Okay, I really do want to discuss how I survived becoming an artist, because the older I am, the more miraculous I think it is that I became an artist. First of all, it was very, very, very hard. You had to learn to be alone. You had to learn to express what you needed to express, whether the professor liked it or didn't like it. And look, I had a professor when I was 21 who was famous for making stripes, and I didn't know how to make stripes. He told me I had no talent. I cried for a year. Then I went back and luckily found a professor who thought that working from your heart is the only way to go. So you can't listen to anybody else. How I learned to work from my heart, though, is another story. In 1978, 79, I became obsessed with my father's number from Auschwitz. And it's as if I had never seen it before. And I was maybe 30, and I had my first studio, maybe 32. I had my first studio in Washington, D.C., really like what you would imagine a studio, and it was cold. And I was wondering, really, I'm paying rent now, I'm the real thing, I'm going to be painting, what do I have to say? And out of nowhere, totally unprepared, and to this day, I don't know what I'm going to say. I make work to find an answer to where I am in life. Like this painting behind me is from when my daughter Ariane got married to Ofer Margalit. It was a Moroccan wedding. I was so inspired by the beauty of the wedding that for 3 months all I did was paint the roses. There were rose petals everywhere. You know what I need to clean this? Anyway, sorry. So the work always has its own presence, and the context in which I take that work is really trying to find what is it that moved me about that experience. We can't remember everything. We can't feel everything. And I think one of the things that is a great gift for an artist is to be able to focus. Thank you so much. Thank you. I actually have them in my purse. I am prepared. My husband, I can see, did I not come prepared? Anyway, in 1978-79, I really became obsessed is an understatement. I must have done 300 works on paper. Now remember that this is before Schindler's List, the Holocaust museums, all the literature. I think maybe Elie Wiesel's Night was out. That's it. And maybe 1 or 2 books by Primo Levi was starting to be published. And here I was, a young artist who wanted to be taken seriously, who wanted to be recognized for my work. I'm ambitious, but I didn't care. I did not care. I had no choice if anybody would like these paintings, and I myself didn't even know how they would end up. And why I learned to work from my heart is because I let them go completely black. I start each work by writing what I'm thinking and feeling on the work, and then it has its own life. And in this work, I wrote my father's number, I wrote stories, I had a prayer shawl that turned out to be black instead of white, a talit. Everything kind of was magical. I had a piece called Barbed Wire. I didn't know where it was going, and I let it get black. That's how much I let my ego go. I was not going to worry if this was going to be beautiful work. It had to be honest work. And that feeling of the work being honest has stayed with me all these 40 years. What I did do, though, and this is the only part I get credit for, is I didn't just say, ugh, it's so dark, who cares? I went back into the work and tried to find light. My professor at the time showed a new gallery, a young gallery in Washington, D.C., my work, and to the dealer's credit, the art gallery owner's credit, he was all at 28, he said, these are so dark, nobody's ever going to buy them, but I'm showing them. Every painting sold out. I ended up with a show after the exhibit at the Jewish Museum in New York. It was reviewed by the New York Times. All of this is not to impress you. What's my message? I just worked from my heart. I didn't care. And that has stayed my motto all the time. And one of the things Heschel, a component of Heschel's living at the same time, was a very brilliant artist named Hans Hofmann. He was also a painter and a teacher in New York from Germany. And he and Heschel shared very many thoughts together. One of them is an artist, it doesn't matter what you're doing, should not be concerned with style. If you're busy trying to keep a style going, not only will your audience get bored, you'll be so bored you'll wonder how you could even do another one. Each piece has to be from that moment, and that doesn't mean that I don't work on a painting for a year. I could work on a painting for a year and I don't even know what it's about, and I always think, oh great, it's done, and then I go back to the studio and it's far from done, and I feel like, ugh, and then I tell myself, why am I in such a hurry to finish this? As soon as I finish, I have to start another one. So just stay with it. So don't worry about style and just be in the moment with your work. And let it tell you where you want it to go. Don't try to tell it where it's going. Trust your mind, trust your heart, trust your experience, and just go with it. Okay. What does it mean to be in the moment and truly seen? The first sentence when I started university, the first class I ever took was actually a philosophy. Shelley, was it philosophy and literature? Murray, Professor Murray. I got married at 18, so my husband is truly my memory. But anyway, I took a class that really, you think about all the hundreds of classes we all take and how little you remember. This was the first sentence of this philosophy of literature class. He said, a person needs to see. And I don't even think I understood it as much till a conversation I had last Shabbat with my son-in-law, Ofer. It had to do with flowers. First of all, flowers to me, after the Holocaust, I have a lot of conversations with God, you can imagine. But flowers always brings me back. And nothing seems to move me as much as Shabbat flowers. And then I'll tell you about an experience I had with flowers going to Japan as part of Israel in a minute. But I had a very interesting conversation with my son-in-law about flowers. He said something about flowers being born, and that had me spinning on, think about it. Flowers come from Mother Earth, and we cut them. So they're cut, and it's like a life. And you could take those flowers, and this is really what I feel about art being life being art. You could get a bunch of flowers and put them in a vase, and you're done. That's easy. Taking 6 vases and deciding what will go with this height. Do I cut them? Do I not cut them? And I told Ofer, I don't want my husband or anybody to bring me flowers when I'm very, very tired. Because flowers is something that I care about. So I cut them, I put them in the vase, I change the water a day later so it doesn't smell. I want them to live as long as they can live. And if you keep cutting them and changing the vases, they have a very long life. To me, that's a metaphor of seeing. Seeing just a simple flower. Sometimes when I'm doing arrangements, one of the flowers, the buds will break off. So I literally run, get a little plate, a teeny little plate, cut the little stem so it gets some water, and it can float in there for a whole week, which my flowers just did since last Shabbat. So that's very important. The other thing that to me was just a miraculous, I don't even know, some things are truly beyond language. This was a beyond language experience. My dear friend Meir Abulafia, who started Israel, asked me to go to Japan after the tsunami to do art therapy with the survivors of the tsunami. I went and couldn't believe what I was witnessing. They had set up the Japanese are very organized. They had set up temporary shelters. They had set up rooms where there were all kinds of art supplies and people could come. Now, some people were holed up in their shelters. They never wanted to come out. But there was a whole group who had lost children, spouses, their homes for sure. They had lost everything in this horrible tsunami, which killed hundreds of thousands of people. And yet, there was a core group every day in every little Japanese town we went to, and people would come to do art. So we would have all the supplies set up. There was a dance therapist. Yotam would play the guitar. It was really moving. And I only cried once, I'll tell you after. So I would say to the people, what do you miss? So here's how the art therapy in part of Israel, the tsunami, after tsunami worked. What did you miss? And Fegi's going to her Yiddish class. I'm jealous. Bye. Thank you for coming, Fegi. What did you miss? I would ask these people. Some of them were in their 80s, and there was a beautiful elderly woman who had been a ballerina, and she was like in her late 80s, And most people, I said, draw what you miss. Most people drew their gardens. Okay, that's fine, but they miss more than their gardens, believe me. So I would say, okay, that's great, but do another garden. And they would have to do gardens till they got to that place where gardens no longer were what they missed. So this particular woman did one of the most beautiful abstract paintings of water and chunks of her house being blown, washed away. Then she cried. And you know how the Japanese are so stoic, they don't cry. So then she cried. What made me cry is when I realized at the end of my 2.5 weeks there, it was March, and here I was witnessing, you can't, God forbid, witnessing cars that look like little toys, schools that are completely wiped out, a whole city completely flat. There's no way to even describe it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing with my own eyes. But what survived? The cherry blossom trees. And before I left Japan, the blossoms were opening. And I thought, if ever there is a God, truly, all you have to look at is a flower. That's simple. You don't have to be reading or learning or davening or anything. All of it is beautiful and everybody to their own. But I'm telling you, flowers make you believe there's a God. So that's about seeing, really seeing. Then how to be in the moment and let go. First of all, I already told you about my experience, but then when I taught for 10 years. And one of the hardest things was really breaking people's egos. So the first thing we did, day one, is everybody had to break their beautiful new supplies. Can't be precious, you just got to break them. So everybody broke their beautiful new oil pastels, their new beautiful pencils. Everybody had to break them. Not the pencils, but the oil pastels. And the next is I would ask, why are you here? And then I would say, because university was so hard for me, and I always felt like I had to prove myself all the time. And I lived in a different time. Going to university studying painting in my time was really like boot camp. It's like, if you can survive 10 years of this, then you can be alone in a studio. But when I taught, it was with much more loving kindness. I would critique first what was good and then, but. So I would say at the very beginning of the class, what do you want to get out of this? And I had this is 2 examples I'll give you. I had a student I'll never forget. He was a graphic designer, and I'm speaking to all the designers here and writers and everything. I gave them all a homework. I said, do this the best way you know how. Your greatest talent, just bring in the best work. He brought in the most beautiful cityscape I had ever seen. He probably spent 8 hours because the class only met on Fridays. And I knew how hard he worked, but I also knew that he really wanted to loosen up. I had him erase 75% of it. After that, he was just the best artist in the class because he broke his tightness. And he trusted me. You have to build trust. He trusted me and he erased. It actually broke my heart to have him do that. But I'm a teacher, right? So that's what I wanted him to get, and he got it. The other person did not like what I did and left the class. It was a Middle Eastern student, and I asked them to, because this was an international class, and Middle Eastern doesn't really matter. I don't know why I mentioned it, except that I'm in the Middle East. But he brought in a wonderful, wonderful painting. But I knew that he was trying to learn composition. So the goal for me was to have him cut up the painting, tear it up, and make a new painting out of it. Because then he'll learn composition. You have to take what you have and compose it. Well, he dropped the class. So you don't win of them. You don't win all of them, but that's how you break ego. 3 things I'd like to leave you with, really 3 tips as we close off. 1, you cannot, it is impossible to judge your work while you're working. If you're busy judging, then you're not putting the energy into the work. If you're busy judging. And I read a wonderful metaphor in a book called Ikigai, a Japanese philosophy that could be very Heschel, and it's wonderful. It gives a metaphor of a swimmer. That imagine if an Olympic swimmer where every second counts, imagine if they were busy worrying and thinking about, am I going to make my parents proud? I can't wait to show the medal. Am I going to get the medal? Am I not going to? They could be off by 1 second. So it means really throwing yourself into it where you're in a state where you're not thinking. And whatever it takes to not think. If you have to tear up 52 works, but get there. You can get there. If I can get there, you can get there. And let the work fail, whether it's baking a cake, whether your painting gets black, you feel like you've worked for 3 weeks. I promise you that all of a sudden the 3 weeks' work will happen in 1 hour. It'll all come together. We all think that we should start something and it's going to happen. There is a process to thinking, feeling, coordinating, what's in your heart, what's in your mind, what you see. That all has to work together. It doesn't just happen in a minute. And I think that's it. I think the question that I would like to ask you to think about, I've always wondered about this. A magnolia is one of the most beautiful flowers in the world, and it's the most fragrant, but it only lives a day when you take it off the tree. And carnations, which, look, all flowers are flowers, but to me it's a more pedestrian flower, and it lives for 2 weeks. So the question is, would you want to be a magnolia or a carnation? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do questions. We have about 10 minutes before we have to finish up, so we have time for about 3 to 4 questions. Who wants to go first? Okay. We're going to do the mic, though, back and forth. Okay, I'm going to start running.
Okay. Mindy, I have like a gazillion questions for you. Hi. Okay, I want to go back to context and the very beginning about the artist coming without memory. For me, context is the whole gestalt that we bring to our work, to our vision, to whatever. Now, I understand the tension between bringing yourself but not bringing your memory. That's a wonderful tension to think about. But I'm interested also as someone who views art. Am I to bring my context? Am I to understand your context? And if I don't know your context, if I come as a tabula rasa, is that the way I'm supposed to approach your work? So I think there's a tension also there between knowing your context and not knowing your context. And I wondered if you want to comment on that. And by the way, I just want to say your son-in-law, Ofer, according to my 5-year-old grandson, is the smartest person in the world.
No, I'm sorry. The smartest is my daughter. Hold on. First of all, I want you to know Laura, who is a cousin and a dear, dear friend. We all grew up together in LA as kids. But Laura, I was actually going to use you as an example of how art can be turning something ordinary into something extraordinary, which you do at the most brilliant form, taking a corkscrew and turning them into the best key rings you've ever had. That's just little because she's a great cook and chef. But I think it's a very good question, and I find it very interesting when I have an exhibit up, and I'm an abstract painter, and it's very interesting. I want people to bring themselves to it. I feel like if they can feel, then I've done my job. I don't want to tell them what to feel or even what to see. Now look, there are different artists for different different reasons. Some people have a need to perfectly capture what they see, and they do it with great expertise. I don't have that expertise. I'm also not a very patient person. So I've had to learn how to paint that suits me. When people used to tell me in my classes I spend, how many days do I spend in my studio, and they would give me excuses that, well, they have kids, well, they have a sick mother, I never let life give me an excuse. I just went in, 3 days, let's say, painted my heart out for 3 hours and left. There is no romantic notion of making art, looking at art, living an artful life. I think Laura's question is great for abstract painters especially. I think a realist artist would want you to see what he saw. I think a conceptual artist would want you to get his concept. I just hope that you feel something in front of my work. And it's always amazing to me because people really do cry. They cry when I talk also. Next question. Yes.
No. Well, thank you for not recognizing me and assuming I was someone else, more important than I actually am. Thank you for the talk today. Very inspiring words. I would be curious to know, you'll be curious to hear about some times in your life when these principles and these things that you've talked about have come into conflict with the political and economic realities of being an artist. For example, I'm painting from my heart, but I haven't sold a painting for 6 months, something like that. How do you navigate those times when you're trying to stick to these principles, but it really doesn't seem like the world is interested in what you have to say?
Outstanding question, because I've been an artist so long that in the 60s, when earthworks and painting was dead, it was very hard. But you just stay with what you need to do. When they say starving artists, they mean it, because every penny you make goes back into studio rent, supplies, photography, insurance, shipping. I mean, it's a fortune. And the reality is I taught. I'm married, so I was able to have a roof over my head and be pretty comfortable. But I used to think my friends who weren't, and they had to waitress, so I was waitressing in my house. You all have to pay a price. I never had the luxury of being a free artist in a studio all day long. I already was a mother at 25. I was married at 18. But I think you just keep going with your own vision. And I'll give you a very good example. One year I was asked to do black and white watercolors for somebody at the Smithsonian who wanted to write about creation. And I called a curator to the studio, and it became a book, creation series. And I called a curator. I was feeling very courageous, and we had finished this project. Called a curator named Claire List, I'll never forget. And she came to the studio, and I showed her these creation series, and she's never responded. 6 years later, exactly 6 years later, it turns out she was doing an exhibition where she needed black and white work. And I had the creation series ready for her. Everything in its time, in its place. Make sure your work is seen. Just keep to it. If you have to busboy, you busboy. I mean, I've done all of it. Teach, take care, raise kids, do whatever I had to do, but I always really, really stayed with my art. I never abandoned my art or what I believed in as a painter. Look, I'll tell you exactly, I just had a really, really successful show in Israel, Jerusalem. What do I mean by successful? I was on the cover of the Jerusalem Post magazine. By all outward standards, I did the hardest work I ever did. It took me 3 years. I gave myself a goal to do an all-canvas show. Doing all oils on canvas was like 12 works, was like running 12 marathons in 3 years. The gallery was gorgeous. I exhibit at Rosenbach Contemporary. They now have moved their space. It couldn't have been more perfect. It cost me a fortune, 3 years, maybe 3 pieces sold. Am I sorry I made that work? No, I have that work. Am I grateful for whatever I did get? Yes. Is it going to stop me from making work? Well, maybe I won't make 12 canvases again, but it's not going to stop me from making my work. Money is definitely a consideration. I deal with students trying to earn $1, a shekel all the time. But that's not where your heart is. I hope that encourages you. Next question. We have time for one more question.
No, we're good. Okay, thank you so much, Mindy.